Let me know when. Well, hello everybody. How are you today? Hold on. Cool. Okay, so my friends are making a bit of fun of me because, believe it or not, I do hate speaking in public. So I hope to calm down in a couple of minutes and just stop sweating. Well, cool. My presentation for today is abusing Active Directory features when you're doing post-exploitation. In fact, while I was in the speaker's lounge, I was talking to a couple of friends who are Windows admin, and I went like, hey dude, you're a Windows admin. Let me show you my slides. And I'm going, oh cool, that's normal. Oh, that's cool. Start showing them a video of them, and they're going like, huh. No, I should be able to block that. No, it's a feature. No, I should be able to do this other thing. No. Microsoft wants it that way. It's a feature. So I hope you guys enjoy. Well, who am I? My day job, I work as the director of reverse engineering at Tenable Network Security. I do mostly managerial work. Sadly, not much technical stuff to do, but I do manage a group of people who are very, very, very smart, smarter than me, and they actually teach me a lot, which is super cool. In addition of that, I do like sharing a lot of code. I do like sharing a lot of knowledge. So you'll probably find me posting and writing either in my own blog. You'll find some of my code in GitHub. You will find me writing articles for PowerShell Magazine. And also I'm in different podcasts. I'm in the Tenable podcast, Security Weekly podcast. I have my own podcast in Spanish called Infosec Táctico, Tactical Infosec. I'm a practical ADD person, influenced. You know, I'm always, my focus will move from one side to the other. So one day you'll probably see me blogging about Bash. The other day about Linux, another day about Mac OS, another day you'll see me coding in Ruby, then C# and PowerShell, and you will see me all over. I have kind of a philosophy. I adapt to the task. So if the task says Ruby is the best, I'll go with Ruby. If the task says the best is PowerShell, I'll go with PowerShell. So I'm very agnostic there. I'm not very religious either way in terms when it comes to computers and tools. So why Active Directory? If you go nowadays to any infrastructure out there, any client that actually has Windows clients, more than none, almost 100% of them will probably have Active Directory to be able to manage all of their computers. One of the main reasons is just authentication. That's the main reason that many haven't. So the user can move from one machine to another. They're authenticated. I have control of what they're doing. I'm able to kind of organize my organization into a functional structure. Also, I can control configurations on those boxes via GPO. I can even push via Active Directory software to my different boxes. So it is kind of a very useful tool. So when we're going as to why Active Directory, I can say that we can practically, if you're a user in the network, we can abuse it. So if we get shell on any of those boxes, we can abuse it. And not only, my friend who's a sysadmin, I was talking with him, and one of the things that he didn't know was that if I get into a computer and I'm running a system, I'm running as the computer, so I can query Active Directory as the computer. And what really surprised him was that he told me, oh, don't worry, I typically use network service account. I'm like, well, did you know that if you're running as network service, you're acting also as the computer? You can query Active Directory to the computer. The only restrictions is that you cannot run executables on the box. More than likely, you won't be able to change anything in Active Directory as that computer, but you can still read all of Active Directory. And that's quite handy. So when we started to look at Active Directory is kind of a... Those that took my class will know this phrase. It's the Microsoft way of doing LDAP. Microsoft decided, well, we're going to create this database with the extension database engine, and we're going to kind of bolt in an LDAP syntax, X500 syntax into it, and it will work as an LDAP server in addition as a database, distributed database service. So it's always distributed. There's a multi-master kind of structure. In fact, the way that domains work is that you have a root domain. That root domain will have subdomains. That subdomains will have other subdomains. And what we typically call it the root, the child domain, and then we have 3 subdomains, and that create what we call a forest. Many years ago, Microsoft, when they started Windows 2000, they said, oh, domains are the security boundaries. Until a project where they started deploying Active Directory in the House of Representatives and at the Senate. And all of a sudden, people from Democrat had access to a Republican system, and they were like, how is that happening? And Microsoft went again and revised everything and noticed, oh, no, it's the forest. Okay, let's change all the documentation. Security boundaries, the forest. So that's still a misconception for many people that come from NDS, from Novell. Back in the days, they go like, okay, if I'm in a domain, I should not be able to touch anything in another domain. Well, you can, as long as you're under the same root domain. Also, if we look at the structure, it works this way. Each one of those domains will actually contain objects inside of those. I know I'm getting boring. I'm explaining Active Directory, but believe me, I have a purpose for it. We have those objects there, and when we look at how actually all of that is named, we see this nomenclature where we have LDAP, DC equals contenso, DC equals local. That is kind of like the domain component. That is what actually makes that domain name. Then we have what we call a common name, a CN. That typically I just refer to it as a container. It's somewhere where I can have other objects inside of that one. And then we have the organizational unit, the OU. An OU, the difference between an OU and a container, a CN, is that an OU I can attach a GPO. I'll show you later how I can pull all of those GPOs out of OUs and list all of those OUs, and very useful information. Also, when we look at Active Directory, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that Active Directory is actually split into 3 different kind of partitions. We have our schema partition that says, this is my object. A person is composed of this. A user is composed of this. Properties. Then we have configuration partition, which is a configuration-fied AD. And one would think that only AD itself could read it, but if you're a user, you can actually get in there and kind of get some very useful info. Then there's the domain, the default naming context, where we can go in, and that's where users, groups, OUs, all of the nice stuff actually lives when we want to get there. Well, typically when we get a shell, there are different tools that we can actually use to do our work. In the case of Windows, we have default Windows commands. Those default Windows commands are going to be net. Every pen tester out there knows how to do net use, and use net to add a user, add them to the domain group, list users, and all of that kind of stuff. In fact, I've written post modules for Metasploit that actually uses that to kind of enumerate throughout the entire domain who is the domain admin, so I am able to steal his token. So we already know about net. In addition to that, there are AD troubleshooting tools that we can leverage, install in boxes. Also AD management tools. And if we want to be very old school, we can also do BBScript to abuse those. Okay. Okay. So when it comes down to, also we can use PowerShell. PowerShell is very flexible. It gives us access to .NET, gives us access to ADSI, to COM objects, and we can do whatever we need to kind of get into that network and enumerate it. Also, several exploitation frameworks out there actually do give us access to Active Directory. Metasploit has an extension for it. Core Impact, we can actually go and use Python Win32 API calls in the agent and actually leverage those so we're not touching disk. When it comes to AD troubleshooting tools, we have NLTest, DCDIAC, and NTDS-Util. Sadly, they're only installing domain controllers by default, unless a person is actually installing RSAT, remote system administration tools on their box. In fact, I've been able to get into boxes where just by using the dsym commandlets, I've been able to install the tools for them on the box. I noticed that they have several tools, but not all. I get in, I install the tools I need, I leverage those tools, and I just keep moving inside of their network. Now, a lot of people actually do not know about these tools that were added since Windows 2003. When you install the domain controller, you install the administration tools, there's a couple of tools which are the directory services tools that actually allow me to query Active Directory. I do a bunch of very nice, fun stuff with AD. In addition to that, they will actually let me pipe from one to the other as if it were PowerShell and be able to kind of move data from one side and take actions into the network. Now, one of the problems there is when we use those tools, if there's app blocker, if there's any other countermeasure, they're going to be blocked, they're going to be logged. When it comes to PowerShell, one of the advantages of PowerShell is that I have access to .NET, plus I have access to ADSI to abuse those. But one of the problems, just like in the Microsoft way, when you're moving between one tool set between the other, depending on versions of Windows, as you can see, if we're using Active Directory module, you'll see that each version of Windows actually has different numbers of tooling that we can actually leverage and abuse. So when it comes to post-exploitation, we have to go with the lowest common denominator when we're writing all of our tools. In the case of Metasploit, Meatballs actually added LDAP extension that we can use in post modules. It's a very nice extension. Sadly, it's a bit slow. It actually uses Railgun to do most of its tasks. Also, OJ, the Colonial, added an extension to Interpreter that actually lets me query Active Directory directly from Interpreter session. It's called the Extended API, and you will see a couple of modules I wrote to actually leverage all of that. If I want to load his module, I just do from Interpreter load Extend API. I get it loaded, I check help, and when I look at help, I'm going to see I have 3 different commands. The commands are @c computer enum, @c domain query, @c user enum. As you can see, all of them have the same options where I just do @c domain query, I give it a domain or area to query, and I can also control what are the max results and page size. I can get all of that information from Active Directory. Here's an example where I'm just going into the OU for the domain controllers. I'm listing all of the domain controllers for that domain. Also, in the case of Metasploit, there are already some modules that do take advantage of some calls, many times command line tools. And also, I'll demo today, I wrote 16 new modules. Out of those, I think only 12 I decided to upload into GitHub while I kind of clean up the others. Thankfully, I had friends at Black Hill Security, TrustSec, and Accuvant go through some of those and play with those, and they really like them. When it comes to command line tools, one of the things I hate about depending in post-exploitation about command line tools is more and more I'm seeing people using app locker. I'm using them using software restriction policies. I'm seeing them using ACLs to block the tools. And in fact, very recently in Europe, I was helping a couple of friends in a pen test, and we were just banging our head against the table because any action we were actually taking in that network, he was finding about it and blocking our access. And we kept moving laterally between boxes, and every time we started to play with the box, he would find and close our access to that box. Later on, we found out when we were doing the reporting that what he did, had process auditing, and he had triggers for anomalies. And what were his anomalies? If you run NetSH, WMIC, IPconfig, and other regular tools that we typically use, he would get flagged, that system, because he says, none of my users are techies. If I see ipconfig and it's not me, something's wrong. And we're like, huh, that's a nice approach. Because one of the first things we did is we went in, we checked the event log, and we didn't see any app locker events. So we went, okay, no app locker. We went to the registry, no SRP. Cool. Then, sadly, we had shell, ipconfig. Cool. 5 minutes later, shell's not working. What's wrong? Okay, let's try the other host. We move in. Okay, let's try a bit of WMIC. 5 minutes later, we lost shell and gone, crap. And then we find out what was actually happening. In the case of PowerShell, we can actually use PowerShell in many systems. Because believe it or not, a lot of administrators put app locker. They block cmd.exe. They'll block a bunch of other tools, but they won't block PowerShell because they actually use PowerShell. So let me block all of this other stuff, especially on if you want a perfect example of shooting yourself in the foot, put an app locker policy, block PowerShell, and then go into your Exchange server. And nothing works. Completely broken. Go into your new SharePoint server. Broken completely. So they tend to not touch PowerShell. In fact, we can actually use PowerShell. It has an isolation type where I can only do bracket @c bracket. I can put any path. I'll get that object, start interacting with the object. A good example of this is this example here, where I just got into the box. I ran @c without anything, just an empty string. It will bind to that default domain, and then I just did gplink. Give me all of the group policies that have been applied to the domain. Only to the domain. And I'm able to see them there. I'm like, huh, cool. Now let me grab one of those group policies, and let me do the same. Let's create an object using the ADSI isolator. Nice. Now what am I seeing? That they have a policy named display name, and in display names, the policy name is auditing, and I see that they have several machine extension names attributes added to it. So I'm like, so they're actually auditing. So I have to be careful. Now I know that I'm operating into what I call an MPE, a non-permissive environment. In fact, MPE comes from a bit of military jargon, from where you're moving into an area of operations covertly. You don't want them to know who you are. You want to get a feel of the land. You go into Google image search. You search how they dress. You buy the same clothes. You buy the same backpacks, same shoes as everybody else. You're not using tactical Gucci, so no 511, no Crytek, none of that crap that will make you look like, hey, I'm an armed gringo over here. And you operate in that environment. You're operating in a non-permissive environment, an MPE. So when I see app locker, I see auditing, I see everything, I shift completely mentally as if I'm in an MPE, a non-permissive environment. So with PowerShell, we can do quite a bit of stuff. We can create a user very easily. We can then take that user, add him to the admin group, because net tools were blocked, DS tools were blocked, other tools were blocked, but not PowerShell. But I can do whatever I need in the domain. I can actually delete a user. I can enumerate all users in the admin group. Also, another thing I can do is I enumerate users' memberships in other groups. What groups is he a member of? I can get all of that information. Very useful. Also, for those of you who create an account, you do your stuff, then you delete your account, and you're going like, hey, I'm safe. They won't know what happened. Well, that will leave in Active Directory for 180 days, even though you delete it. I've been talking with a couple of forensics people that tell me that they just go in, they look for deleted items, and they can find the accounts that the hacker created temporarily, or accounts that kind of sound like another user's account, and they just kind of backtrack from there. And in fact, it is not that stealthy. As we're operating Active Directory, if they have auditing enabled, actually, we're going to be triggering a bunch of events. We're going to be triggering events for account creation, if an account is enabled, account password was changed, password change was attempted, account was deleted, account was added to a security global group, and if an account was changed. So we're getting quite a bit of noise that we're generating there. In addition that we're using PowerShell, and with PowerShell I can actually configure it to save whatever you ran in that script. I can get an idea of what you're running by saving it into the event log. And then I can just query the event log and kind of backtrack what you were doing in the system. So PowerShell is not actually giving you any stealth whatsoever on the system. It's very handy, very flexible. Most of the time it's enabled, and we can kind of abuse it. Now, one of the things I like to doing, other than the regular, let me enumerate a domain user, all the use, group policy, that's fine and dandy, that's cool, that's fun. But since I'm operating in an MPE environment, one of the things I like to abusing is something called service principal name. If you have anything in your domain that actually uses Kerberos for authentication, that service will do an entry on the computer saying, this is the service I'm listening on, and this service accepts Kerberos authentication. So what I can do is I can say, well, let me find out all of the machines in the network that have RDP enabled. I get a list of all the machines with RDP enabled. Okay, now I want to find out all of the machines are running MS SQL. I get a list of all the machines are running MS SQL. And I have not sent one single packet for discovery. I've not done a ping scan, ARP scan, port scan, nothing. None of that shit that will get me detected. I'm just using the features in Active Directory. I'm just going, hey, Active Directory, which machines have RDP? Oh, thanks. Oh, by the way, can you resolve their name and give me their fully qualified domain name? Cool. Oh, what OU are they in? Oh, thanks. Can you give me the group policies that apply to that OU? Oh, perfect. Thanks. And all as a user. And even as network service, I can get all of that. Just have to ask nicely. It's that kind of girl. Also, another thing I can do is, in the case of SQL, where you have instances, I can get the port of that instance. So you know that in SQL, each instance will bind to a different port. SPN will actually give that to me. If you change the default port for RDP, it will register that change in port also inside of the SPN. And I don't have to do a port scan on your box and see to what port you actually enable RDP on. Active Directory pretty gives it to me. So I wrote a couple of modules that live in my GitHub to kind of abuse all of these settings. All of them happen in memory. I'm never touching disk. And 90% of them are read operations, so they're nothing in the event log. And you can enable all of the auditing you want in the event log, and you will still not see these actions, which is great. I can enumerate all domain controllers. I can enumerate all MS SQL controllers using their SPN. I can get a list of all of the disabled users, so I don't lose my time going after the user. Another thing I can do is I can enumerate all organizational units inside of a domain or a forest. Additional to that, I can get domain trust, including subnets. Domain trust, even if they're Active Directory, are they to an LDAP server, or what type of connection are you actually doing in that trust? I'll be able to get that trust and what type of trust it is, and is it for a one-way trust or a two-way trust. So that way I know how to move laterally between organizations, or even partners, if I'm evil and that partner isn't, or that I'm a pen tester and that partner is actually in scope. I can get all of the OU members, everything that is inside of the OUs, computers, users, groups, I can enumerate those. I can find all of the Exchange servers, plus I can limit it to specific roles. So I know typically my favorite target is the CAS, because it's where all of the clients are actually connecting to. So I can know mobile devices. I go into the CAS. I go into this database, I start enumerating all of the mobile devices. Now I have all of the phone number, all of the phones they're using, plus the version of operating system of all of the mobile devices that they're using, which can come in very handy. Then I can go after your mailbox server, get into the mailbox server, a couple of PowerShell commands to search for a string throughout the entire database. All of those emails, then I can pipe them and save them into a PST that then I can export out of that Exchange server and have all of the emails that probably had the word secret, password, or stuff like that in them, which comes very handy. That way I can be more targeted. I'm going after the mailbox server. I then had to do a port scan. I then had to do a ping scan, ARP scan to kind of find where that server actually lives. I just asked Active Directory very nicely, where's the Exchange server? Oh, and by the way, I want the Exchange server with the mailbox role. Here you go, Carlos. I can do my stuff. Another thing I can do is I can enumerate sites. Once I enumerate a site, I'm able to kind of go in, see the structure, physical structure of that customer. In addition, when you create sites, you have to create subnets. And when you create a subnet, now I have the IP ranges that I need to kind of go after. GPOs, well, duh. If I get a GPO, I know what security settings you actually have. So not much there. Also, one other thing I can do is I get group membership. I can also check to what groups that user actually belongs to, in addition to enumerate a group and get all of the users in that group. Another thing I can do is I can enumerate users, but I kind of gave it a twist. I kind of made filters for if the user is disabled, if the user is locked out. I can kind of take those away from the query so they won't appear in my results. And then what I'll do is I'll check the user access control, and I'll first check for all of the accounts that have no password. I'll get all of those. Then I'll check for all of the accounts that they need to change their password on next successful login. I'll save those into another CSV so I can discard those. So when I start doing my brute forcing of the network, now I have a very limited target area that I'm going after, and I won't be losing time going after accounts that probably I can waste hours going after it, and it's not a valid account for me to go after. I can get all of the groups, the DSN, distinguished name. I can get all of the logged on users. So let's do a demo. Here we go. So I got a session. In fact, let me move because I'm not seeing here. I'm seeing that the user is West C. Perez. I'm seeing that the IP address is not the same IP address from where I'm connecting to. So I already kind of have an idea that there's a domain called West. I know that the SAM account is C. Perez. I set a global variable session 1, so I don't have to enter session on each one of my post commands. I'm going in. I want to find out to what groups is C. Perez a member of. I set my SAM account. I look at the options. Everything looks good. I run clear now, and then I will do a run. And I see that sadly C. Perez is a low domain user. Okay. No biggie. Let's move along. One of the things I'm going to do now is I'm going to see what are the domain admins that are in this domain. I want to check out who they are. So if I get another shell as one of those users, I know already that they're a domain admin. Oh, sorry. I'm first getting a DSN because I need that DSN, that distinguished name for the other commandlets. And the DSN is DC DC West, DC Contoso, DC Local. Can I use post AD, enum AD group members? Now I'm going after the domain admin group. First thing I'll set up is for what domain I want to query. So I'll use West. In fact, if I don't specify one, it will take the default for which that machine is a member of. The advantage here is that I can then hop into other domains or just hop into the root of the domain and enumerate those. I specify the group DN, domain admins. I check my options. Looks well. The DN for the group looks well. I clear, I run. And now I have that there are 3 different admins. The default administrator, one called Jose Quiñones and another called Alice Chang. And also if I look at the OU, I see that there's an OU called ITS. So that actually gives me kind of an idea that how they're structuring everything. I don't drink, so. Yep. So what now I'm going to do is I'm going to check the trusts. I set the DC for my local domain. I run that. I see there's a two-way trust to contoso.local. Now I'm going to change the DN. I'm going to run it. And now I see that there's an east and a west. So I just identify all of their domains. One thing to keep in mind, some organizations actually go corp.whatever.whatever, and they never have a root domain alone by itself, and you can get bogged down there. So going through trust is actually very useful to kind of map out how the entire Active Directory is actually structured. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go for the sites. But I'm going to go to the root because it has to be the root, the one I queried. That's why I went through all of that work of checking trusts. I go in, I'm seeing the subnets, plus I'm seeing all of the domain controllers. The module will actually give me the IPv4 and IPv6 address for each one of those domain controllers. In addition to that, all of those subnets are saved as nodes inside of the Metasploit database. So I can then automate that, writing my own scripts or my own plugins. Here we check the nodes, and we can see the ranges have been saved there as subnets. If I go into host, right now I'm looking for the address, the comments, and the information on it. I can see that I have my domain controllers, and the comment, they have been mentioned as domain controllers. So now I can start targeting those boxes inside of Metasploit since they're in the database. Another thing I can do is I go again to post Windows Gather, and I want to get all of the OUs. I change again to root. I want to go after the main office. I run those. I'm getting all of the OUs. I'm seeing that they have OUs for sales, IT, marketing, operations, and also I'm seeing if they have group policies applied to them. I'm looking at the name of these group policies also. So for example, I'm seeing, they have EMET rules. Oh, I see that they don't trust sales. So they have special EMET rules and special rules for Java for the sales team. Nice. Also, I'm seeing that some of the other teams have more relaxed OUs, GPOs, just by looking at the name of the GPOs. So let me go in and let me get all of the GPOs because I was only seeing those for the OUs. I also want to see the ones for the domain. So again, I go after the main office, show options, everything looks good. I can actually save it to loot if I want to as a CSV. I run it there. Now I'm getting all of the different organizational, different GPOs. And one specific thing, I'm seeing if that GPO is applied to an OU, is it applied at a domain level? I'm getting all of the settings for that GPO. I'm getting the path or where it lives in the chair. So I can download that XML file and just parse it. In addition to that, if they're using WMI filters, I'm getting that WMI filter. And what is that WMI query? So I can also know if the target box I'm operating in, that GPO actually applied to it or not. So I'm getting quite a bit of information about how they're setting up their security, like EMET rule, base rules for everybody for EMET, Java 7, GRE 7 for their sales group. Oh, so they're using Java 7. Cool. So now I got quite a bit of information there of what they're actually operating and what they're actually using as a regular user. So now what I'm doing is I'm just getting all the users. As you can see, I can not get the disabled ones. I can actually specify the user's access control, if they need to change the password, never expired, they require a smart card or not. So I can get quite a bit of information and kind of tailor what specific user do I want to enumerate in that domain. The thing I'm doing right now is just making sure that it gets stored in loot. When it gets stored, it will be stored as a CSV file that I can then parse, use PowerShell, Python, Ruby, whatever other tool to parse that CSV file. Then values, I'm going against corporate. I run it, I get all those users. You can see it will actually, I can see where that user is actually living, if it lives or not inside of another OU for what specific OU. So now I know who is Sally, and if Sally is part of sales, I know who is in ITS, and I can go after them. I know who is actually an executive and go after him instead of another user. And as you can see, everything's saved as a CSV. In fact, the idea for kind of writing this tool set came from a very good friend of mine. I won't mention his name because he's in the internal red team, so I don't want to give an idea of where he's actually working at and his environment. So he actually called me one night and told me, "Hey, Carlos, dude, I'm having a big problem." I said, "Well, what happened?" I got into this SQL server, and lo and behold, they have XP_CMD shell, but I cannot do shit in it. What's wrong? It's running as network service. Well, you can read AD, you can enumerate. Oh, how can I do this? And then I went home, I built my lab, I built a machine. I said, give me a couple of hours. I built a bunch of PowerShell scripts for him, because even though he could not get to cmd.exe, he could get PowerShell. So I built a bunch of scripts for him that did what I showed you. They use ADSI searcher, ADSI. They would go into network. It would enumerate all of the computers. It will then resolve each one of them. So he was getting the computer name. He was getting the version of Windows, service pack level, IP address, fully qualified domain name, inside of AD, where did they live and what OU. I gave him that first script. What he did is turn it in base 64. He went to PowerShell.exe-enc for encoded, pasted his base 64 string there, hit enter. Now he had all of the machines inside of the domain. Plus he knew which ones were Windows 2012. He knew which ones were 2008, which ones were Windows 7, service pack level, which ones were in sales, which ones were in research, which ones were in QA, and all as network service through a SQL server, which we shouldn't have that kind of access. But hey, Microsoft's nice, that's a feature. They want you to use that. Then what I did is I wrote another tool for him for dumping all the users. So he got all of that information. And then back then Microsoft hadn't patched the hash vulnerability in Windows 2012 for RDP. So I go, oh cool, let's do a search where the SPN is term serve. Also the OS name is Windows 2012. And we got for him all of the Windows 2012 servers that actually had RDP enabled, and he kept that list saved for when he actually was able to get into another box, and we're like, nice! Because that environment was very secure, so NetBIOS, SMB was blocked everywhere, everything was Kerberos based, so he was said, okay, no problem, I'll do pass the hash via RDP, and he started getting into boxes later on. So as you can see, we can actually abuse quite a bit of Active Directory, and still when I talk with people, they don't know that they can do that. And it comes back to my philosophy that if you take a sysadmin and you teach him how to pen test, he's an unstoppable force. But if you take somebody who just goes to your typical pen testing class, he just becomes a tool monkey that only knows how to click buttons, use this tool, I get this, use this tool, I get this. And then when he faces an adversary that actually knows their stuff and starts blocking stuff, he goes like, I don't know how it works. And you can actually see it in the reports. When you see the report and you go like, okay, you told me this is broken, how do I fix it? I don't know. I'm a pen tester. That's not my job. They're like, oh, crap. I see that quite a bit. Well, guys, that is all. I do thank you for coming to the presentation. I hope you like it. If you want to get the modules, they're right now in my GitHub. If you go into github.com/darkoperator, you'll find them on their repo called interpreter-scripts. That's where I kind of save all of the modules I wrote for my own personal use. There are a bunch of others in there that if you want, you can also play with them without any problem. On Twitter, I'm Carlos_Perez, and you can email me any questions you guys have.